Soweit? Den Telefon.
Hello and welcome to today's Uncommon Sense episode. I am Joshua Barnes and I'm thrilled for everybody to be here. My other guest speakers along with me would be Steve.
Hello, friends of Furby.
Hi, this is Al Shalloway with PMI.
And I'm singing from the Oslo fjord, watching three-masted schooners from 1897 go past on the fjord.
Oh, all right, Tom. Well, are you ready for me to have them pull up your slides?
Yes, I'm ready. Shall I push the magic button?
Yes.
Okay. And and I'm going to push my 15-minute timer because no matter what happens, I'm going to stop showing slides and we're going to start discussing after maximum 15 minutes. Welcome, everybody. By the way, if you take a quick photo or QR photo, you can get a copy of these slides with the upper one. And if you're interested in Agile, the lower slide gives you everything I've ever written or videoed on Agile. So they're in the slides too. And I'm posing together with some of my early Agile Engineering books. I'll give you a quote in a minute from the Software Metrics book from '76. And 1988, the Software Engineering Management book was very heavy on Agile, and quite a few of the Agile Manifesto guys said it was their inspiration for what they did in Agile, which allows me to bill myself as the grandfather of Agile if those guys are the daddies. Here's my agenda for the coming 15 minutes. It's quite dense with a lot of technical subjects. You can't possibly absorb these things. I should probably use an hour each slide, but I'm going to flash them at you to set the stage and saying I've got some heavy technology to help you engineer Agile systems. Here is a quote from my 1976 and in the US 77 book, and I'm quite proud of this. I'm going to read it. A complex system will be most successful if it's implemented in small steps and if each step has a clear measure of successful achievement, as well as a retreat possibility. This is being Agile, right? To a previous successful step upon failure. That's what I call Agile as it should be. And I'm afraid most current Agile isn't very good at measuring successful achievement as a basis for the Agile retreat. So, but I leave you with that thought, and I'm still trying to convince people they should measure the output of Agile, maybe in several dimensions. I'll be saying a little bit more about that right away. Okay, so point one is this, and I made the point deeply in the '88 book, that software engineering is a lot more than writing code and programs. And I'm even guessing that a lot of the people, most of the people listening here know that. They know there is data there, and that's not logic or program. They know there are people there. They're certainly conscious there's hardware there. And if they've ever violated the European Union GDPR, they know there's some legalware there. In other words, even if you're dealing with narrow software engineering, you have to have a lot of different disciplines that you take care of. And that's what my Agile engineering method always has done and always done. It is not code-centric, it is systems-centric. So point two, and another chance at capturing these slides with your camera is just that we have to talk more about systems level thinking rather than software thinking. Software immediately brings to everybody's mind the idea of computer programs. And even if you are very, very focused on the programs and the the software in that sense, you still need to integrate it with all these other things. And so you can't have ways of thinking that are primarily looking at the logic of the program and the writing of the code and the testing of the code. You have to have a broader perspective. Now, number 3, stakeholder engineering. By the way, in June, I wrote a little book on this, which you have the access to at the bottom left there. There's a link. And I've always wanted to write this book, and I finally did. And it's all about stakeholder engineering. But in a nutshell, a lot of the disciplines I see, they're at what I call the small, simple systems level, OKR, user stories, a few teams. But if you really are building like a national health system for even a small government like Norway, you have enormous complexity, enormous number of stakeholders, enormous types of different stakeholders. And even one stakeholder, we can analyze its qualities, like its accessibility and adaptability and criticality. We can look at the various costs of dealing with the stakeholders, short-term, long-term, and the various strategies for doing so. So here's a very multidimensional picture of what I call stakeholder engineering. All these factors come into play, and it's all detailed in the book. Point 4. I think we talked too much about delivering code or user stories or something like that, packets of logic. And I think what we need to talk about in terms of value delivery is multi-value delivery, maybe 3 to 10 simultaneous values or qualities. Things like the security goes up and the user friendliness goes up and stuff like that. And we have to look at the delivery of these values, stakeholder values, in relation to multiple costs, both short-term, what you're spending right now and the time you're spending now and the people involved, but long-term, like your technical debt, to take a simple example everybody can relate to. And we also need to look at the risk factors and the uncertainties when evaluating, how are we really going to get these values, and are the costs really not going to surprise us? I call this the efficiency or agile efficiency measure. And I've got a detailed chapter free download for you here if you want to look into this idea of a major tool for managing agile quantitatively, multidimensionally, economically, risk-wise, and I'm calling it for the moment architecture efficiency or agile efficiency. Point 5. I see too many people and methods that still think in terms of one dimension, like the goal and the cost and the system we're building. In my world, I start by dividing up into the top 10 stakeholder critical objectives. Let these 5 be a symbol of that for planning coronavirus. I take a look at 2 to 5 major cost areas. So I'm already dealing with 7 dimensions here. And then pretty early, we work out various architectural alternatives. These are high-level architectural alternatives for fighting COVID in Norway. And then we can rate each one of these. And the bar chart gives a rating of how good it is for this objective and how good it is for this second objective and how much it costs of the budget. So in other words, multiple value objectives together with multiple cost objectives together with multiple architecture simultaneously. And down here in a nutshell is a lot of risk management, like worst acceptable cases. That's the world of agile engineering for me. Okay. By the way, these could be agile steps, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, something like that. Okay. Okay. there's a point here about design. Design and architecture seems mainly absent from many of the agile methods, or just given symbolic attention. They mention it, but they don't do it properly. I've always been impressed by what I call dynamic design to efficiency as practiced by IBM Federal Systems Division, and where the architect intervenes at every step and re-architects the system to manage its costs and quality. I commend that thought to you, and there's some nice little references to it, including a free book on Value Agile. Here's another one of my good friends. One of the most successful adoption of these agile engineering methods has been for 20 years at Intel, with over 20,000 engineers trained. Here's a very interesting public report, which anybody can download, using both my planning language for requirements and my spec QC, quality control, to manage the defect rates. And long story short, we get over 100 times reduction of defects before the requirements enter a phase like architecture. So that is engineering quality control in a nutshell. Okay, and keep on looking at my watch. Okay, 4.5 minutes. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, so number 8. I believe that priorities, in other words, deciding which incremental step you're going to deliver or set of steps, needs to be done by computing the step that will give you the highest values for the lowest costs. And then here's a priority computation that this step gives an awful lot of good value at very, very low set of costs. Therefore, on the surface of it, it's the best step. These steps here, they are with regard to risk, like the quality of information you use to estimate how good these were, and the extremes or ranges of possibilities. So, but long story short, most people have a notion of fixed priorities, like, you know, what is your first priority? You ask somebody and they tell you. I believe priority in engineering of Agile needs to be computed dynamically at each Agile incremental step. And here's an example of how to do it. Now, another thing, let's call it the yellow sticky problem. There's an awful lot of primitive, simple methods, like yellow stickies are the symbol of it. And I think it's time that we thought a lot more about digitization, about automatic tools, which I just showed you an example of here, and ontologies and semantic triples and the new solid and Web3 and artificial intelligence, and bring these things into play in our agile engineering. It's definitely not there in almost everything we see on the market. Number 10, the famous problem of scaling up, which you'll all recognize because the original Agile wasn't suitable for really large, complex things. You might say, yes, it was if you plugged in all the right plugins. I don't know. But long story short, I was singularly unamused by SAFe and a lot of these other scaling up methods. I just was unimpressed everything I read. And I took a look and I said, I don't have this problem of scaling up. I've done huge systems. As early as the 1980s, I was doing 1,000 programmer systems at Siemens that I referenced in an earlier slide. And we succeeded with these methods. So, and I put this to my good friend, Eric Simmons, who's the hero who made everything happen at Intel, using ideas from Competitive Engineering book and earlier books there. And he said, Tom, your method, Competitive Engineering, does not scale. It doesn't need to. It is scale free. And we took a deeper look and said, my goodness, by some accident, everything in the Agile engineering methods automatically scales up. And slide 11. 1 minute to go. We'll make it. Here's a simple example of what I call a relatively small project with in Norway with 16 developers, 3 testers, 3 staff. They've chopped their product up into 4 sub-products, and in parallel, which is an interesting agile theme coming up, they manage about 8 qualities or values simultaneously in a week-by-week agile process, and they quickly deliver so much quality that they destroyed their competitors and took them over. There's a very nice story. But this is using the methods on what I call a small scale, and at the other end of the scale, we have 1,000 programmers plus 1,000 hardware engineers on the Siemens project I mentioned earlier. I said I'd stop after 15 minutes. I'm stopping. So we'll do that. Here's the book I'm working on right now, free copy if you want it. And we're ready for questions and discussion. There's a summary of what we did. And I've put my questions up, which are mainly to ask you, if you really have large scale, complex stuff, how do you handle it with your agile methods? So I'm going to turn off my slides and shut up for a while.
I think see if we can get a question up. Yeah, John Ward had a question for you.
Good old John. I've begun talking to him recently. Hi, John. Okay. So long story short, in the I have a paper called "What's Wrong with OKR." I bet you can Google it. So, John, if you want, and I'll send it to you if you remind me, but I have systematically looked at OKR. I find about 10 major faults in it compared to the way I would do objectives in language. And I politely dismiss it as saying it's great for what it was originally designed and used for at Google, which is an individual planning their personal work 2 weeks ahead. Great, much better than what they're probably doing now. Not good enough for the national health system or for your sales system. Okay, they have a complexity which demands a different way of handling objectives. So please, but look at the free literature I've given you during the course here, or in particular, I have a little book called Value Requirements, which also contains comments about OKR and several other methods. But I show the constructive, positive. This is how I would do it to tackle these large, complex systems.
So I have a question that might be a little outside of this topic, but Al, it was something that you had either posted on LinkedIn or tweeted. I can't remember, but I'm positive it was from you. And it was around what would have happened, Tom, if you would have actually been when the Agile Manifesto was created and the people that were there that signed their name on it. And I got to say that really piqued my curiosity as well. What do you think the impact might have been if you would have attended that event? And how would you have maybe brought some differing views from what we've come to know from what came out of that?
So, long story short, I've already quoted you my 1976 book. I've shown you the 1988 book well before, which many of these same people had read and consider foundational today. Okay, they say I did influence them at that meeting and beyond. Okay, the people like Kent Beck we're talking about here, and Jess Sutherland, by the way, to be very specific. And so I think I was there in spirit to a degree. I think they felt confident it was time to do something like iterative, incremental stuff, and let's call it agile, right? I think that's what was happening there. I think if I was really there personally, I might have had some problems. Remember, they had a big problem of compromising and agreeing. And I'm not going to back down on any of my stuff. So I don't think that would have worked very well.
Well, I actually want to underscore something because I think it would have been different. I find three things missing in Agile that you have led in many ways. One is this quantification of things. Another one is what you call and I call software engineering. People really misunderstand what engineering is. And they think building a bridge that you built 1,000 times is engineering. And I say, no, that's just manufacturing outside. And the third one is a lack of theory and systems thinking. And it could be that had you been there, nothing would have happened because half the crew there or more, I don't think appreciate those three things. So it may have been that maybe it's good you weren't there because maybe nothing would have happened. And what we got was actually a good start at the time, or at least a useful start at the time. But I guess what my speculation was, what do you think would have happened if when the Agile Manifesto came out, it was had some engineering, had some quantification, had some system thinking, and realized it wasn't all about software? It's funny, we call it the Agile Manifesto, but that's not what it is. It's the manifesto for Agile software development, and it's extremely team-centric. So thoughts on that? That's what prompted my question or post, Joshua.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry.
yeah, I'm interested, Tom, in given that background. Maybe not what would happen if you were there, but what would have happened had those three things been put in the manifesto?
We would have saved about 20 years of wasting our time with failed projects.
That sounds pretty matter of fact.
Yeah, so I agree, but can you elaborate on that? I mean, I totally get it, but why don't you elaborate on what we lose by not having those three things? Okay. And Steve, I know you do a lot in this too, so feel free to chime in.
So stakeholders want improvements. By the way, notice I didn't say users or customers. That's a primitive, old-fashioned way of thinking about stakeholders. It's too narrow. It's only good for small systems. Stakeholders want improvements, okay? And I call these improvements stakeholder values. And the easiest way to think about them is think about qualities like security, privacy, flexibility, that kind of thing for the moment. But there are a lot of other things. Now, stakeholders want values. Now, if you just say, I want enhanced security, which is the level of, say, a user story, I, as a security conscious guy, want better security. You have a hell of a lot of ambiguity, to put it mildly. In other words, nobody's defined security and nobody's defined a hell of a lot or better or more. So the project, which could be a major government project, gets going and never delivers even 10% of the security they really needed because nobody clarified what they needed up front and agreed to the numbers of what security they need up front and engineered the system to deliver that security up front. Okay, so in other words, we don't even take a clear position on what our stakeholders want. I believe with variables and increases and enhancements, which is the dominant thing they want, you have to use numbers. If we only use numbers on the value requirements, we would have a clarity from the start, and we wouldn't waste time building. Even in Little Norway, we have huge projects that go on for years and spend billions and totally fail. Okay, and by the way, they're using Agile all over the place in their programming, right? So Agile is not the solution; it's just an incidental hang on to the problem. Okay, the problem is management not even realizing they have to be clear about their objectives. By the way, that's a fault of the business schools and the MBA programs. That managers don't actually learn something as simple as quantification of objectives. They learn quantification of finance, right? The balanced scorecard realized there was a problem there, and then they published the balanced scorecard and allowed non-quantification of several of the key goals. Okay, so the problem starts with management. Forget all the IT people. if management was crystal clear about the fact that they had to quantify the critical objectives of their stakeholders and hold people accountable for delivering it, problem solved. Right there. It's not a software problem. It's a management problem.
I think it's more subtle than that, because while I totally subscribe to the idea of having engineering approaches, quantified numerical approaches that capture multi-stakeholder value with the language and impact estimation tables and all the amazing tools that Tom has invented. And notwithstanding that we have the deficiencies of the business schools who probably don't go beyond the 4 operations when it comes to math proficiency, the real problem I see here is more of a psychological nature, and that is the resistance to numbers. Now, engineers, they love numbers. They that's the language they use to reason and to set whatever targets they have. But most people have more of an allergy, a counter reaction to numbers. And the classical one that we hear over and over again today in 2021, when IT is everywhere, software is eating the world. How many people in the C-level rooms say, "Oh, I don't understand technology"? Well, that's not a merit. That is a liability in today's world. But if you want to deal with technology properly, then you need the quantitative numerical approach. And here we have another allergy that comes about, and that comes from the agile world, where, Al, you hinted at this recently again, we have like the story of the chicken and pigs, which are still around. So we have the anti-management culture, and anything that has a number is, metrics, is considered as something that will be abused by management. Now, that is not the purpose of the proper use of numbers and metrics and quantification. But if you have these two cultures, now at the top, you have an allergy for numbers. And at the bottom, you think that numbers are a kind of, boa constrictor that will choke you to death. Well, no wonder no one is using numbers. So, Tom, what are we going to do about these cultural, psychological issues?
Okay. When these IT projects fail on a large scale, even large government projects and private ones, it seems to me that nobody gets hanged. Nobody is held to account. Okay, so let's just start with the idea: why can people spend public money, enormous quantities, on health systems delaying our better health, and they're not held? The ministers and the civil servants are not held to account at all. Never. And the same with man. So I think we need, if we began with accountability, that people realized they were personally, as a minister or civil servant or CEO, accountable for these values, maybe they would take it seriously and make sure things happen. So I think we have a total lack of motivation to succeed and to not fail. I'm afraid it starts there. And we know that when people do feel accountability, they do act differently.
Well, it's funny you say that. I agree. But it's interesting, if you look at what the Agile community has done, it has not been, even though they talk about trust and accountability, I would suggest it's just a different story of how to get out of accountability. The fact that there's not an engineering attitude means that, well, it failed, but it's a complex problem, so we can't blame us, when, yeah, it's complex, but that doesn't mean you give up or you can't see it or you don't take an engineering attitude. I think there's another thing, Tom, you said that was interesting to me that I hadn't pieced together until today. So in the Agile space, there's a large number of people. I don't think it's a majority, but at least there's a large number of people who appreciate the value of test first. Now, that is admittedly at the requirements level if you're doing acceptance tests, or at the unit level if you're doing test-driven development down there. But when you talked about agreement and numbers, so people understand what we're trying to get, it's more than metaphorically, there's a similarity that what we're doing is we're saying we're having a way to quantify and very explicitly, objectively state, this is the outcome we want to have. It's even a higher level than the requirements. It's more at the objective level of the results. And when you think about it, there's nothing in the way of getting that done other than ourselves. I mean, there's no technology needed for it. There is understanding needed. I don't mean I don't mean to downplay the importance of that, but you don't know how to, there's not a skill set of being able to write tests or something. So why don't you underscore that? Because that connection may be a way to get in, that if we won't write applications unless we understand what they're doing, why are we starting projects or enhancements when we don't understand from a quantification point of view what they mean?
I refer you back to the Confirmat example, the 16 people delivering qualities, right? Now, they started delivering, actually, they did all their planning about their high-level objectives with the executives 1 week after Kai and I trained them for 1 day. The marketing people agreed, we need these, much better user friendliness, to take an example. The 16 engineers, and they actually had an engineering education, it turns out, picked up, and every week for the next 12 weeks, they delivered these values. They moved the numbers towards the final targets for release in a quarter of a year. At the end of a quarter of a year, they released and beat most of their targets significantly every quarter of a year for years. Okay. Now, what you're looking at is a numeric value stream that starts early on the second week after we walked in the door. Okay. And every week it keeps more and more of the value that the executives have said they want and need on the market is delivered incrementally. Those are the tables I showed you. It shows the incremental value delivered. Now, we talk about value streams, okay, but I don't see them in the literature, and I don't see them in examples like I showed you in that slide today. Okay, that's from 2003, by the way. Okay, we were doing this stuff very early. I'm spending a lot of my time at Agile conferences explaining what is wrong with the Agile manifesto, to no avail. Okay, so long story short, I'm not interested in the testing first bit, Al. I'm interested in the other thing you brought up, the higher level objectives of this, if you like, the C-level objectives. The powerful stakeholder objectives. And that's not a matter of software testing. It's a matter of measurement of the emission of the value stream on a continuous and early basis.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that we should be interested in that, although I think there are places where it's very useful. I meant that maybe it's a way that some people could maybe metaphorically understand the importance of what you're saying. And that leads me to this question, which is, okay, you achieve that, no doubt. What is the difference, do you think, in what people were hearing when you did that versus what they hear in many projects? Now, that could be what you gave them, but it could also be something they heard. Like, what aspect of what you were telling them that they heard made the difference?
A little bit difficult answer. I'll tell you what I've discovered. Where we have success with Agile engineering, we actually have an engineering culture. Hewlett-Packard, Intel, Ericsson, Siemens, everywhere we have, large-scale successes, they were receptive to the idea of engineering because they were engineers. And the moment you go into commercial organizations with MBAs running it, and the only numbers they know about are financial numbers, and ideas of quality numbers are alien to them, you don't get buy-in, okay? But they fail tremendously. And they're not held responsible, so they keep on doing it for 20 years.
So one of the things that you had in your presentation and you touched on was that you from a scaling approach and not needing one for what sounded like a very significant amount of people working together. Why do you think that there has been such an appetite for scaling frameworks? And we see some of them that have a huge share in the marketplace. Why do you think that's, and it's lasted for a while now?
Yeah. Now, if we even look at like Jeff Sutherland's own statistics about Scrum failure and success, right? So 58% was it either fail or don't fail? I forget, but it's because they don't do Scrum right and stuff like that. Now, here, when smaller projects fail, we fix it up and hide the problem, and nobody cares. The moment you're doing an 8-year, $8 billion government project, it gets very public in the press and in the media. And somebody says, aha, Agile isn't working because we used small scale Agile. So obviously we need big scale Agile. Okay. And again, if you go deeper, they still aren't quantifying the objectives and tracking them. They still are getting these large scale failures in spite of using so-called higher, scaled up Agile methods. Okay. So in other words, I think it's just an excuse for why we've failed for the moment that we need to do, and somebody's sold into that market. Yeah, you need to buy our large scale stuff. Here's a very simple proposition. If every project committed to delivering measurable value first week and every week, accumulating towards the long-term goals, done. What else do you want? They're not doing that. They don't need large scale. That works at large scale and that works at small scale. By the way, there's a technical problem here worth mentioning. A lot of people with the larger projects say, well, but we have to do planning and coding and testing for 3 years before we can even have a small system running. That's wrong. Number one, I've learned you can always build on the back of the old system, however horrible, and you can always decompose any large architecture into small architectures. And I speak about that in detail in my books, like the value planning book and the systems engineering architecture book. I have whole chapters on how you decompose when people say it can't be done. So you get small increments to deliver early and continuously and incrementally. And it's about time Agile people learn more about decomposition than just user stories and epics.
How about this question for you? What's a good book of yours to get started with?
Okay. I have referred to several books in the slides, so I hope you grab a picture of that. If you get real stuck, you can go to gilb.com, find more books. That's easy to remember. And I've just recently put about 11 of my books on leanpub/u/Tom Gilb. Okay. Now, which book would I recommend? It all depends on who you are and what you need. At the moment, I'm writing a book which I put on the. Did I put it on the first slide here? No, I didn't. Okay. I'm writing a book now I call Sim Plan. I put it up on my LinkedIn last night. Okay, so you can follow it. What I'm doing, I'm taking all of my ideas and I'm decomposing them into about 1 to 500 ideas, which can independently be used and learned without worrying about all the other stuff. So if you don't want to get overwhelmed by too much stuff and too much complexity, and I'm of that nature. I like to do one little bit at a time and master it. You might like to take a look at the Sim Plan book, okay? Because it's emerging now. I'm going to start on requirements tonight, and I did design tonight, and I've done requirements already and other things. So other books. If you want to know the whole truth and nothing but the truth in detail, at LeanPub I have a book called Value Planning, and it's about 800 pages. And I just poured my heart out for 4 years, not worrying about the fact that no publisher would touch it because it's too damn big. These are the same publishers who wouldn't publish the Bible because it's too big, by the way. Okay? No comparison otherwise. But the value planning book has all the detail about everything, and it is decomposed into 10 chapters, which each have 10 parts. In other words, there are 100 incremental components of learning the methods in value planning, which, by the way, has a Russian and German version on LeanPub too. Okay.
Interesting. All right.
By the way, if anybody is scared by the paying for the books and they're a poor student, email me. I'll send you a free copy of anything I've mentioned.
Awesome. So, Steve, it looks like there was a question here, probably for you. Great insights and discussions for everyone. How TameFlow could help to quantify the flow of value in getting leading indicators. Steve, you're on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
Always. Yeah, I saw that question, and I also replied in the chat that in TameFlow, well, we use a lot of metrics to ensure that we achieve flow, but those are like operational metrics. We also use a lot of numbers for the, let's say, the financial side, so to make the MBAs happy. But I don't have that finer quantification techniques that Tom has produced during these years. And as I mentioned to Tom sometime last year when he came to my Campfire Talks shows, I would love to take on those techniques and add them to TameFlow, because they are completely like compatible and synergic with what I am doing. There are some aspects which actually will brilliantly complement even the theory of constraints. You know, TameFlow has a lot of TOC. And for instance, Tom mentioned at the beginning that he has some, issues with approaches that focus on one thing. And he mentioned like the goal, which makes me like, oh, no, what is he saying? But I know exactly what Tom means. Now in TOC, even though apparently there is this single-minded focus on the goal, we must not forget that it is supported by the thinking processes. And the thinking processes are logical trees which capture the needs of many different stakeholders. So that multidimensional representation of multi-stakeholder needs is present, completely present in TOC, but it's not quantified because it's expressed in logical terms. It's not expressed in quantitative terms. Now, logic and numbers, I think, go very well together. So that's why I say that the, let's say, the elaboration of TOC, TameFlow, and language, impact estimation tables, stakeholder engineering, all these things, I think, should be pursued and should be done. Tom, your comments on that?
Oh, Steve, would you rephrase the question in a nutshell? I like small increments.
Yes, I know. I tend to talk too much. So the question is, now, what do you think about integrating your quantitative approaches with things like TOC and, or of course, my own TameFlow?
I think it's a good idea, and we're going to do it.
Great.
So there was another question by Minton Brooks asking, did architecture or centerism of the unified process get thrown out with the bathwater? And I'll at least chime in a little bit from a discipline agile perspective. It hasn't. Some of the things that evolved from the unified process, specifically the RASH unified process, the risk value lifecycle approach to what we cover in either the iterative lifecycle or the flow lifecycle. One of the earliest milestones, proven architecture, is there. One of the 8 principles of discipline agile is enterprise awareness. One of the things from a process goal perspective we do very early is to make sure we've got alignment with enterprise standards, which also comes from, again, a more technical and architecture perspective. So it is still alive and well in discipline agile. And Al, I know you can chime in for some of the things that have now been also incorporated in the discipline agile value stream consultant space.
Yeah, I think the thing about DA, and I think it's interesting, the integration of discipline agile as Scott and Mark brought in, and how I brought in Flex. I think both of them are a different angle, but an engineering approach, in the sense that DA has this toolkit that gives you all these options of what you're trying to accomplish, and then multiple ways. I mean, gives you a concept, an objective of what you're trying to accomplish, and gives you a multitude of ways of accomplishing it. Flex is angled from the other way, actually not unlike Essence by Ivar Jakobsen, which I think is very good work. The only reason we're not kind of integrating with him is not because we don't like his work. We love his work. We think it's brilliant. I think it's really good. But Flex has been designed actually with the same mindset. It's a different thing. I'm not claiming we have Essence, because we don't. Essence has been designed to be able to be used in other places, and I think it's good. But it's the idea of saying, here's an objective, which in a sense is an abstraction, because you're not saying how you're going to get to the objective. You're saying this is the objective you want. What Tom is adding is not only this is the objective, but we're going to quantify the objective. And I'll admit we don't go that far. And I keep hoping I'll get to that, but I haven't yet. Okay, but it's one of the reasons I love listening to Tom, because he keeps reminding me of the gap of where we are to where we can be. And I like that distance. A lot of people would say, oh, that's kind of bashing or something to show the delta. And I'm saying, no, that's good. We can keep improving. But what Flex does is it's really a pattern language, not unlike Steve's work with TameFlow, that says if you put these objectives together where you can implement them in different ways that meet how you're working on things, or perhaps even what your mindset is and what you're looking at, I think it's a very powerful technique. And I think what's common in all 3 of these, and you two correct me if I misstate this, but I don't think I will. There's an attitude toward learning, toward understanding what's going on. And if you, I'm not claiming we do it as precisely as Tom does, but at least we're pointing in the right direction. And we have certain things that we say, look, if you do this, you'll get improvement, maybe not as quantified as Tom's approach. But it enables you to continuously learn in an objective way by having objectives, how to do it, different ways, the why and the who, and having options there. And this is one of the things we don't have in Agile. In Agile, it almost is like, well, just figure it out. And if you try to compare one to another, you're doing something bad. And there's no science that I'm aware of that has that attitude. Of course, we're not scientific. So
Al, you just said something which is one of those my trigger words, the pattern languages. And with Tom, I've had some conversations that even his language, believe it or not, but that P could be interpreted as the pattern. It is a pattern language. And
well, that's not what it stands for. No, I'm just kidding.
And I think the next step in general pattern language theory is to combine the aspects of quantification with the pattern categorization. So I am seeing that the pattern form can be extended with quantified attributes. I think that's also another very interesting area of research.
So, Tom, I want to ask you something. Oh, you go first, and I want to ask you something.
Short remark, because by the way, on LinkedIn recently, I went public with the fact that I think Essence is a brilliant basic architecture for sharing methods, and that I have offered them my entire language to be brought into Essence and shared. And I'm hoping all other methods people will do the same thing. So I'm happily working with Ivar Jakobsen on this, this week.
Yeah. So let me ask I don't know if it's a bold question or not, but when I look out in the LinkedIn space, and I know lots and lots of Agile consultants who are kind of over Agile in a sense, or over how Agile shown up. They're not over what the intention was. When I look at who's here, there's Tom, there's Steve, there's me and Joshua from the DA space. And then I know several other people. I mean, we're not the only ones. There are lots of other really smart, Ivar, you've mentioned them a few times. Is it possible? No, it's always possible. It's always a few, I forget who said it. Somebody was asked, is it possible that a few small people can make a difference on the planet? Said that's all it ever is, a small group. I think it's time for a few of us. I mean, it's not like a business partnership. It's more of an awareness partnership to start speaking this about the engineering, the scientific, the patterns, the quantification. And I don't know how we do it. And I've been trying to do this for a little bit. And Tom, you've been very generous of your time with me, but I think that might be something we need to think about. I'm not talking about a new manifesto. I'm talking about creating awareness of the importance of engineering, quantification, learning, holding accountability on an objective scientific manner. What are your thoughts about that? And I know we just have 5 minutes, so that'll be my closing comment. But
again, awareness is not sufficient if people are not motivated. If they don't feel this will solve my problem. So we have to begin with the responsibility for the delivery of numeric value at the management level of any project or transition or whatever. Okay. So now the good news is some organizations are already so motivated and have the culture. Those are the ones that have become my successful clients. So let's see. Now the other thing is the word I want to bring in here. It's idealism. Okay. There's commercialism and there's idealism, and there may be something in between. But I know you guys well enough to know that we are idealists. We really want a better world for development out there, and that's independent of any commercial consideration. We just feel it's the right thing to do for our culture. So let me suggest that the idealists band together, and Ivar Jakobsen and Essence is an example of that. Okay, and try to defeat the commercial forces of selling useless stuff that doesn't work. And it won't be easy because those forces are sometimes large and powerful voices. But, and may the idealists win in the long term, and hopefully somewhere in the short term.
Let's see. I think we probably don't have time for too many more questions. So I'll ask Tom, do you have any other parting thoughts you would like to leave those in live attendance, as well as those that might be watching this on the recorded version with?
Yeah. Download the slides and get the free stuff. And even the paid books at LeanPub have generous 50% free samples. And if you can read, and if you are persistent in gaining knowledge, you will be able to acquire these ideas for free.
I would say for my parting thoughts then, thank you very much for being here. Lots of history. I mean, somebody with the vast experience that you've had, and some of the things that you've been able to share with everyone has been fantastic.
My pleasure. I never pass up a chance to spread the gospel.
So Joshua, we missed some stories of Herbie this time. So I was just wondering, and know that Herbie and his scouts, they are always looking for new challenges and new hikes. And maybe the next one should be through the woods to find the cabin of Tom on the fjord there in Norway.
Tom's cabin.
Tom's cabin.
Tom's
That will
cabin.
be the new base camp.
So the other thing that I've been waiting for, Steve, is something really out of the box this session.
Yeah, but Tom is already completely out of the box, so I can't match him today.
Al, on to you. Anything else for you to close out?
No, I actually am a little encouraged by when I stop and I think about it, that there are quite a few people like Tom and Ivar and Steve that are out there. And I think we need to remember we're not alone. That's one of the deaths for idealism. And I know there are many, many others we don't know about. And maybe one of the ways, I agree with you, Tom, it's not just awareness, but sometimes just knowing it's possible and other people think it's possible makes it a little easier, even though it's really up to ourselves. It's not like somebody else is going to do it. But sometimes it feels dark in the morning. So, yeah, I think you know what I mean. So anyway, I really appreciate your being here. I really think to the audience, I know a lot of people respect me, and I got to tell you, I always feel like an amateur when I talk to Tom. So he's somebody who really has a lot of good information. He's a lot more precise and deeper thinking, and I highly recommend that you pay attention to this just whole library he's given you. And you should at least study a little bit every week. I do, and I continue to learn. So I'll give you that recommendation.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for all the great comments and participation in the chat and being here. And we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye from Norway.